The Mafia boss dragged the black Maid across the floor. The mansion watched in horror. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Lena Johnson had always been an outsider. Working as a maid in the grand mansion of the Romano family, she knew her place in the world. A place where the rich and powerful ruled, and she was just another face in the background. Her duties included cleaning the vast, marble-floored rooms, polishing the silver, and ensuring everything ran smoothly for her employers. But today was different. Today, the tension in the air was thicker than usual, and Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Victor Romano, the notorious Mafia boss, was known for his sharp temper and ruthless behavior. No one in the mansion dared to cross him, not even his closest associates. But Lena had seen him before, in his calm moments, when he wasn't a tyrant, when he was just a man. She'd always thought he was different, but today, that illusion shattered. As she entered the main hallway with a tray of refreshments, she overheard an argument between Victor and his associates in the study. The words were barely audible, but Lena could feel the anger rising in the room. She hesitated for a moment, but the sound of footsteps approaching made her step aside. Victor walked past her without a second glance, his usual air of confidence replaced by something darker. As Lena tried to go about her duties, the oppressive atmosphere lingered. She felt a sharp tug on her apron, and before she could react, Victor's hand gripped her arm. "Move," he barked, pulling her toward the center of the room. The marble floor felt cold beneath her feet as she stumbled, trying to regain her balance. Everyone in the mansion, who had been going about their business moments ago, froze. The silence in the room was deafening. The powerful Mafia boss, usually so composed and controlling, was now dragging a woman across the floor like a rag doll. Lena's heart raced. She had seen Victor angry before, but never like this. His grip tightened, and she felt herself being pulled further, her feet skimming the floor. The room was still, the tension unbearable. No one dared to speak, not even the other servants who were usually quick to gossip. Lena's thoughts raced. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was a breaking point. She had been nothing but obedient, invisible even, to survive in this world. But now, something inside her snapped. Lena didn't resist, but she refused to show fear. She lifted her head and met Victor's gaze with quiet defiance. The silence stretched on, filled only with the sound of their footsteps echoing in the grand hallway. Then, unexpectedly, Victor stopped. He let go of Lena's arm, his expression unreadable. He looked around at the stunned faces of everyone in the room, the power he had once held slipping through his fingers. The tension that had filled the room dissolved into an uncomfortable stillness. It was as if, in that brief moment, the world had shifted. Victor stood there, motionless, as the realization dawned on him. This was not the power he thought he had. Lena's quiet strength had done what no one else could. It had made him question himself. And for the first time, Victor Romano wasn't the one in control. Lena stood in the middle of the room, her heart pounding as the echoes of her actions hung in the air. Victor Romano, the powerful Mafia boss, stared at her for a long moment, his gaze shifting from disbelief to something else, something she couldn't quite place. The tension that had filled the mansion moments ago had begun to fade, but not in the way anyone expected. The room, once full of bustling servants and associates, had turned eerily silent. The other members of the Romano family, who had witnessed this uncomfortable standoff, exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. Victor's expression softened for a fleeting second, then hardened again. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by someone like Lena. She had always been invisible to him, a mere background character in the grand scheme of his empire. But now, something was different. Lena had stood her ground, and for the first time, he saw her as more than just the help. In that moment, the balance of power had shifted. Victor's grip on the mansion, the money, the fear, all of it had slipped from his hands, just like that. He cleared his throat, and the room seemed to exhale in unison, the tension breaking like a rubber band stretched too thin. "What do you think you're doing?" Victor's voice was low, but it held an edge of authority. He didn't raise it. Instead, it was controlled, like a threat in disguise. Lena didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, said everything. She knew her place in this world, but she also knew that she didn't have to remain in the shadows forever. For years, she had been the invisible servant, watching as the rich and powerful paraded through life, oblivious to the lives they crushed beneath their heels. But today, she would no longer stay silent. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of the consequences anymore. "I'm not afraid of you," Lena finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. The room fell into another heavy silence. No one dared to speak, not even the other servants who usually whispered behind closed doors. Victor's jaw clenched, his usual bravado faltering for the first time. He had seen many things in his life, many moments of power and control, but this was different. He looked at Lena, really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just someone to be used and discarded. She was a person, with her own strength and dignity. The realization hit him harder than any slap could. The others in the room had already started to step back, avoiding eye contact. They could feel the shift too, the subtle but undeniable change in the air. Victor turned away, unable to face Lena any longer. The arrogance that had once defined him, that had built his empire, now seemed insignificant. His empire, his mansion, his wealth, none of it mattered in that moment. It was all built on the backs of people like Lena, people who had been silenced and oppressed for so long. And now, it was all coming undone. Lena took a step forward, her feet moving confidently across the cold marble floor. She had made her point. There was no going back now. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. She was done hiding. She was done being invisible. The world had always been afraid of the truth, of what it would mean if people like her found their voice. But now, that truth was out there, and it couldn't be taken back. She didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need anyone's validation. She just needed to be herself. And for the first time, she felt a sense of freedom that she had never known before. As Lena walked out of the room, leaving the stunned mansion behind, she knew this was only the beginning. The world was changing, and so was she. There was power in her truth, and no one, not even Victor Romano, could take that away from her. The following days were filled with an unfamiliar tension for Victor Romano. The mansion, once his domain where every glance and every word was under his control, now felt like a place he could no longer command. His every movement seemed uncertain, his usually sharp gaze clouded with doubt. The members of his inner circle, who had once feared him, now watched him with quiet wariness. They could feel the shift, the subtle but undeniable change in the air. It was as if Lena's quiet defiance had cracked something within him, something deep that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just that she had stood up to him. It was that she had done so without fear, without hesitation. For the first time, he found himself questioning the very foundations of his power. He was a mafia boss, a man who had built an empire on fear and control. But what if fear wasn't enough anymore? What if respect, real respect, was something that could only be earned by understanding, by acknowledging the value of those he had always overlooked? Lena had made him see that. She had shown him that his empire was built on fragile ground, and that ground was beginning to crack. He couldn't shake the image of her standing tall, eyes locked on his with quiet strength. She had not backed down, and in doing so, had changed everything. He sat in his office one evening, the darkness outside matching the storm inside his mind. The weight of his thoughts pressed on him like a heavy cloak. How had it come to this? How had he let someone like Lena, someone he had always considered beneath him, make him question his own existence? His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from one of his associates. He glanced at it, reading the brief text. The woman, Lena, is still causing ripples. People are talking. Victor frowned. The power he had once wielded so easily was slipping through his fingers, and it wasn't just Lena. It was the people around him, his employees, his associates. They were beginning to see her as more than just the help. They were beginning to respect her. The realization hit him like a wave. Lena had done something he never could have predicted. She had gained the respect of the people in this mansion, and in doing so, had shifted the balance of power. No longer was he the one they feared. Now, they were looking at her with new eyes. And it terrified him. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced, his thoughts colliding with one another. How had this all gone so wrong? But in the midst of his confusion, something else emerged, a strange, almost reluctant admiration. Lena had fought for something, fought for her own dignity and self-worth, and in doing so, had shown him a truth he had long ignored. He had never had to fight for respect. It had always been given to him. But now, he realized, it wasn't enough to simply demand it. Respect had to be earned. He thought back to the day she had stood before him, unflinching in the face of his wrath. She had made her point. She had shown him that she was more than just a servant. She was a person worthy of respect. Victor took a deep breath and stood up from his desk. He walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of his estate. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his actions. He had always believed that power was something to be controlled, something to be used to dominate. But now he wasn't so sure. He had seen power used in a different way, in a way that he hadn't thought possible. He had seen it in Lena's quiet strength. It was then that he made a decision. He would find a way to make things right. He didn't know how yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Lena had changed him. And maybe, just maybe, she was the key to changing everything. The next morning, Victor walked through the mansion, his mind still racing from the events of the previous day. Lena's presence lingered in his thoughts, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. He had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots, but now, he felt as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of which direction to take. As he passed through the grand hallway, he caught sight of Lena moving silently through the space, her head down, as she always did. But today it was different. There was a quiet strength in her movements, a confidence that had not been there before. She was no longer just the maid. She had become something more, something that Victor couldn't ignore. He watched her for a moment, his mind calculating, before he approached her. "Lena," he called softly, unsure of how to address her now. She stopped, turning to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation. She had made her point, and now she waited for him to make his. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone softer than he intended. He motioned for her to follow him, and they walked together to a small sitting room off the main hallway. The room was quiet, the soft light filtering through the large windows casting a warm glow across the space. Victor stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames for a moment before he spoke. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "about what happened yesterday, and I realized that I owe you an apology." Lena blinked, clearly taken aback. She had expected many things from him, but not this. Not an apology. "I've spent my life believing that power is something to be held and controlled," Victor continued. "That fear and intimidation are the only ways to keep people in line. But you've shown me that I was wrong." He turned to face her then, his gaze steady. "You stood up to me, not out of anger or spite, but because you knew what was right. You didn't back down, and that made me see something I hadn't seen before. You have strength, Lena. Real strength." Lena was silent for a moment, processing his words. She had never expected this from him. Victor Romano, the man who had built his empire on fear, was admitting that he had been wrong. It was a strange, almost surreal moment. "I don't know what I expected from you," she said finally, her voice soft. "But I'm not interested in power or control, Victor. I just want respect. I just want to be seen as a person, not a servant." Victor nodded slowly. He understood now. For years, he had treated people like Lena as if they were invisible, as if their lives didn't matter. But now, standing before him, she had forced him to see the truth. "You are right," he said. "I've spent too long thinking that power means controlling others. But I've learned that true power comes from within. And you, Lena, have more power than I ever realized." He paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "I want to make things right," he said finally. "I want to show you the respect you deserve." Lena looked at him, her expression guarded. She had heard these kinds of words before, empty promises from people who never followed through. But something in his eyes told her that this time, it might be different. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. "I'll believe it when I see it," she said quietly. Victor smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I understand. but I'm going to do everything I can to prove it." He held out his hand, and for a moment, Lena hesitated. But then she took it, her grip firm. They stood there for a moment, the weight of their past actions hanging between them. But in that moment, something new was born. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about respect. And for the first time, Victor Romano felt like he had earned it. Days passed, and the shift in the mansion was undeniable. Victor Romano, the once unchallenged leader, now walked through the grand halls with a sense of humility that had never existed in him before. The mansion, once a place where power and fear ruled, had become a space of reflection. He found himself questioning the decisions he had made, the lives he had controlled, and the way he had treated those around him. He couldn't shake the image of Lena from his mind. She was no longer just the maid, the invisible servant who cleaned his mansion. She had become someone far more important, someone who had shown him that there was more to life than wealth and dominance. Every day, he watched as Lena continued her work, but it was different now. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a sense of purpose that radiated from her. She no longer bowed her head, no longer shrank from his gaze. She held herself with dignity, and in doing so, she had earned something that Victor had never truly given her: respect. As the days wore on, Victor realized that Lena's influence on him had begun to extend beyond the mansion. He found himself thinking differently, making decisions with more care, more thoughtfulness. He no longer saw people as tools to be used, but as individuals, each with their own worth. It wasn't just Lena who had changed, it was the entire way he viewed the world. And yet, there was still something pulling at him, something he couldn't quite grasp. It was as if he was standing at the edge of something new, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. One evening, as he sat in his study, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice steady. The door opened, and to his surprise, it was Lena who stepped inside. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure of her place, before speaking. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice calm but firm. Victor raised an eyebrow. He had expected many things, but not this. "Of course," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lena hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from him. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. "I know you've changed," she said quietly, "but I need to know if it's real. I need to know if you truly see me, if you truly understand what it means to respect someone like me." Victor stared at her, taken aback. He had never expected this. For all his wealth, for all his power, he had never had to prove himself to anyone like this before. "I do see you, Lena," he said softly, "and I do respect you. I've spent my life building an empire, but I've realized that an empire built on fear is hollow. You've taught me that. You've shown me that true strength comes from within, not from controlling others." Lena nodded slowly, as if processing his words. "I want to believe you," she said, "but actions speak louder than words. You've spent your life living by one set of rules. It's going to take more than a few kind words for me to believe you've truly changed." Victor felt the weight of her words. She was right. He couldn't expect her to trust him just because he had apologized. He had to prove it. He had to show her that he was willing to change, not just for her, but for everyone he had wronged. "I understand," he said, his voice steady, "and I will prove it to you. I won't ask for your forgiveness yet, but I will show you that I can be a different person, someone who deserves your respect." Lena studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing, before she finally nodded. "I'll be watching," she said, "and I'll know if you're being honest." Victor watched her as she left the room, her confidence unmistakable. For the first time in years, he didn't feel threatened by her. Instead, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Lena had shown him something he hadn't seen before, and in doing so, she had given him a chance to change. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take that step. He knew it would take time, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just the Mafia boss anymore. He was someone who had the potential to become more, someone who could truly make a difference. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere within the mansion had shifted in a way that no one could have predicted. Victor Romano, once the undisputed ruler of this domain, had become a different man. The air in the mansion felt lighter now, as if the weight of his past decisions had been lifted, if only slightly. The servants, who had once walked on eggshells around him, now moved with a quiet ease, no longer burdened by the fear that had once dominated their every interaction. Lena continued to work diligently, her confidence growing with each passing day. She no longer felt like a mere servant, and the respect that had once seemed impossible to earn was slowly becoming a reality. Victor, too, was beginning to change. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but he was making an effort. The first few days had been filled with awkward moments, as if he didn't quite know how to act around Lena anymore. He found himself doing things he had never done before, asking her opinion on certain matters, considering her thoughts on decisions that affected the mansion and the people within it. He had always been accustomed to making choices without anyone questioning him, but now, he sought her perspective. It wasn't just because he admired her strength or her courage. It was because, for the first time, he truly saw her as an equal. One afternoon, as Victor walked through the mansion's garden, he noticed Lena outside, sitting under the shade of a large oak tree. She was reading a book, her legs crossed comfortably beneath her, completely at ease. He stopped for a moment to watch her. There was something about the way she carried herself now, a calm confidence that was both intriguing and humbling. He approached her slowly, his footsteps quiet on the grass. "Lena," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the quiet space. She looked up from her book, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Victor," she greeted him, her tone casual, yet respectful. For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them comfortable. "I've been thinking," Victor began, his gaze shifting to the horizon as he spoke, "about how things used to be, how I treated people." Lena raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but she listened. "I've been thinking about how I used fear to control those around me," he continued. "And I've realized that it was wrong. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore." Lena closed her book slowly, giving him her full attention. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, she believed that he was truly changing. But she wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. "I appreciate what you're saying," she said carefully. "But change takes time. And trust, Victor, is something that is earned, not given freely." Victor nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He hadn't expected her to just forgive him, and he wasn't asking for that. All he wanted was the chance to prove that he could be different. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm willing to earn it. I don't expect you to trust me immediately, but I will show you that I'm serious about this." Lena studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod. "I'm willing to give you that chance," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't forget how things were before. And I won't pretend that everything is fine just because you say it is." Victor smiled faintly, appreciating her honesty. "That's fair," he said. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The conversation shifted then, and they talked about lighter things, the kind of things that normal people talked about. The awkwardness that had once existed between them was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding. Over time, their interactions became more natural. Victor continued to seek Lena's advice on various matters, and she, in turn, began to open up to him in ways she never had before. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was a start. One evening, as Victor sat in his office, reviewing documents for a new business venture, Lena knocked on the door. "Come in," he called, not looking up. Lena stepped inside, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said that day in the garden. About how you're changing. I just want you to know that I see it. But you have to understand that this won't be easy. You've built your life on control and fear. Undoing that, it's going to take time." Victor looked up from his papers, meeting her gaze. "I know," he said, "and I'm prepared for that. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I can be different." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I hope so," she said, "because I want to believe you. I really do." And in that moment, Victor realized that he wasn't just trying to change for her. He was trying to change for himself, too. He wasn't the same man he had been when Lena first came into his life. He was better, and he was going to keep proving it, no matter how long it took. It had been a few weeks since Victor made his commitment to change, and though the atmosphere within the mansion had improved, there was still a sense of wariness lingering in the air. The transformation was gradual, but it was real. Victor was becoming the man he had promised to be, though he knew the journey was far from over. Lena, too, had felt the shift. She had seen the change in Victor, but she still held on to a quiet caution. She had been burned by promises before, and though his words had been sincere, she knew that action spoke louder. The mansion, once a place of fear and tension, was now quieter, more thoughtful. Victor's decisions, once swift and domineering, had become more deliberate. He sought counsel from those around him, and for the first time, Lena felt like her voice mattered. She was no longer just the maid who cleaned the house. She was someone whose opinion Victor valued. This new dynamic wasn't easy for anyone, especially for Victor. For most of his life, he had been surrounded by sycophants who fed his ego and kept him on a pedestal. But now, there was someone who didn't bow to him, someone who demanded respect. And it was through this challenge that he was beginning to understand the true meaning of power, not control, but influence built on trust and integrity. One afternoon, as Victor walked through the mansion's corridors, he stopped to watch Lena in the garden. She was kneeling, planting flowers along the garden's edge. Her movements were calm and methodical, and for a moment, he simply stood there, watching her. She had a way about her, a quiet strength that he admired. She had always been someone who had kept to herself, never asking for attention, but she had earned something he had never truly given her, his respect. As he approached her, Lena looked up, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "How's the garden coming along?" he asked, his voice casual but warm. Lena smiled slightly, a rare expression on her face. "It's coming along," she replied. "There's something about working with plants that makes everything else seem less chaotic." Victor nodded, understanding her sentiment. There was a peacefulness in the garden that contrasted with the rest of the mansion. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice a little more serious. Lena looked up at him, curious but cautious. "About what?" she asked, her tone neutral. "About us," he said quietly. "About how things have changed. How I've changed." She didn't respond immediately, but she could tell that this wasn't just idle conversation. He was looking for something, perhaps confirmation, perhaps just acknowledgement. "I've been working hard to make things right," Victor continued, his gaze steady. "And I know that words aren't enough. I know that trust has to be earned." Lena nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She had heard this from him before, but this time, there was something different in his voice. It wasn't just an apology, it was a promise. A promise to do better, to be better. "I believe you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "But the past doesn't disappear just because we want it to." Victor lowered his gaze, understanding the weight of her words. "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't expect you to forget. I only ask for the chance to prove that I can be someone you can trust." For a long moment, there was silence between them. The world around them seemed to pause, as if waiting for an answer. Finally, Lena spoke again. "I see the effort you're making, Victor," she said, her tone more thoughtful now. "And I respect that. But it's going to take time. It's going to take more than just actions. It's going to take consistency." Victor nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I know, and I'm prepared for that." For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions shifting in the right direction. He was ready to do whatever it took to earn her trust, even if it meant proving himself every day. Lena stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands, and walked over to him. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm willing to give you a chance." Victor's heart lifted at her words. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for her to trust him completely. He was simply asking for the chance to prove himself, to show her that he was worthy of the respect she had given him. As they stood there in the quiet garden, Victor realized that he had already begun to change. He wasn't the man he had been when Lena first arrived in the mansion. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming the man he had always been meant to be. Victor had been working tirelessly to prove himself. Each day, he made a conscious effort to listen more, to think before he acted, and to show the respect he had once taken for granted. The mansion, though grand and full of history, now felt different to him. It wasn't just the physical space that had changed, but the atmosphere, the energy that flowed through it. The once cold, imposing walls now seemed warmer, more inviting. The staff, too, had noticed the shift. Where once there was tension and fear, there was now a sense of calm. They moved with more ease, no longer walking on eggshells, their interactions with Victor more genuine and respectful. He had become someone they could approach, someone who valued their input, their efforts. But it wasn't just the staff who were noticing the changes. Lena had been watching, observing quietly from the sidelines, as Victor navigated this new version of himself. She had seen the effort, felt the sincerity in his words, but still, there was a part of her that hesitated. Trust, for Lena, was something earned over time. It wasn't something that could be given easily, especially not after years of feeling invisible, dismissed, and oppressed. But as the weeks passed, she began to see the small, consistent actions that spoke louder than words. Victor wasn't just paying lip service. He was actively making decisions that reflected the respect he had promised. It wasn't perfect, and Lena wasn't expecting perfection, but she could see the intention. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the mansion's vast gardens, Lena found herself walking through the quiet halls. She had just finished her work for the day and was taking a rare moment of peace to herself. As she passed through the drawing room, she noticed Victor standing by the window, looking out at the garden. There was something contemplative in his posture, something more vulnerable than she had ever seen. She hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt his solitude. But then, without thinking, she walked up to him. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. Victor turned, surprised but not defensive. "I was just thinking about how far I've come," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It feels like a lifetime ago that I was the man I used to be." Lena stood there for a moment, watching him. There was no arrogance in his words, no bravado. Just a man who had come to terms with the mistakes of his past and was trying, in his own way, to make amends. "You've changed," she said simply. "But I need to know if it's real. I need to know if you're doing this for the right reasons, for yourself, and not just to make me or anyone else happy." Victor looked at her, the weight of her words settling in. He had thought about this, too. He had asked himself the same question. Why was he changing? Was it for the right reasons? But standing here, talking to Lena, he realized that the answer was clear. He was changing because he wanted to be a better man, not just for her, but for himself. "It's real," he said, his voice firm now. "I'm not doing this for anyone else. I'm doing it because I know I can be better. I know I need to be better." Lena studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But there was none. Just a man who had come to terms with his past and was trying to build something different, something more meaningful. "I believe you," she said, her voice softening. "But trust takes time. And I'm not asking you to prove it overnight. I just need to see that this is who you are now, not just a phase." Victor nodded, understanding. He knew that winning her trust wouldn't be easy. It wasn't something that could be rushed or forced. It would take time, and he was willing to put in the effort. "I'm not asking for immediate trust," he said. "I just want the chance to show you that I can be the person you believe I can be." Lena looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Then take it one step at a time," she said. "Show me, show everyone, that this change is real. Don't just tell us, show us with every action you take." Victor nodded. Again, a sense of determination in his chest. He was ready to prove that he had truly changed, ready to make things right, not just for Lena, but for everyone he had ever wronged. And as he looked at her, standing there with quiet strength, he realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the mansion, the empire, or the power he once held. It was about building something real, something lasting. And he was ready to take that first step. Weeks passed, and the mansion continued to hum with the sounds of daily life. But something had changed. There was a new sense of purpose in the air, a quiet but undeniable shift in the dynamics of the household. The once cold and imposing walls of the mansion now felt more like a home, a place where every person, from the servants to the family, had a role to play and a voice to be heard. Victor Romano, the powerful Mafia boss who had once ruled with an iron fist, now found himself navigating a world that required more than just brute strength. He had started to understand that true leadership didn't come from intimidation or control, but from trust, respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Lena, the maid who had once been invisible to him, had become his guide in this transformation. Her quiet strength had forced him to confront his own flaws, and her unyielding commitment to dignity and respect had shown him what it meant to truly lead. As the days turned into weeks, Victor found himself making more conscious decisions. He sought out Lena's counsel more often, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely valued her perspective. It wasn't just about running the mansion anymore. It was about creating a space where everyone felt respected, where power wasn't something to be hoarded, but something to be shared. One evening, as the sun set over the sprawling estate, Victor found himself walking in the garden. The flowers that Lena had planted were beginning to bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the sterile, gray walls of the mansion. He had often walked this path in the past, but today, something felt different. He wasn't just walking for the sake of it. He was walking to clear his mind, to reflect on the changes that had taken place, both within the mansion and within himself. As he wandered through the garden, he spotted Lena sitting on a bench, a book in her hands, her expression peaceful. She had a way of grounding him, of reminding him of what truly mattered. Without thinking, he approached her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice quiet but sincere. Lena looked up, offering him a small smile. "Of course," she said, moving slightly to make room. Victor sat beside her, his eyes following the path of a butterfly that fluttered by. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "You've made a lot of changes," Lena said after a while, her voice soft but steady. Victor glanced at her, surprised by the observation. "I'm trying," he said. "I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm doing my best to prove that I can be better. I can't change overnight, but I'm willing to keep trying." Lena nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "Change is never easy," she said. "But it's possible. You're proof of that. I never imagined that you'd be the one to lead the way. You've surprised me, Victor." His chest tightened slightly at her words. He hadn't expected praise, but hearing her acknowledge his efforts meant more than he could say. "I don't expect you to forget what happened before," he said quietly. "I don't expect everything to be okay right away. But I hope that, over time, you'll see that I'm serious about this." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his with an understanding that went deeper than words. "I believe you," she said softly. "But trust is earned, Victor, and that's going to take time. I can't just give it to you because you ask. You have to prove it every day, in every action." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't asking for instant forgiveness or trust, but for the chance to show that he could be the man she, and everyone else, could rely on. "I'm ready for that," he said. "I don't expect it to be easy, and I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to making it right." Lena glanced back at the book in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. "You're not the same person you were when I first met you," she said. "And that's a good thing. But remember, it's not just about changing for the sake of it. It's about staying true to who you are, without losing sight of what really matters." Victor took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "I understand," he said, "and I won't forget. I promise." The conversation drifted to lighter topics then, and for the first time in a long time, Victor found himself laughing with Lena, enjoying the quiet companionship that had slowly blossomed between them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its challenges, but it was real. And that, Victor realized, was what he had been searching for all along. Real connection, real change. And with Lena by his side, he knew he was on the right path. The mansion, once a symbol of power and fear, was now a place of possibility, a place where respect and trust could flourish. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, Victor knew that as long as he kept moving forward with honesty and humility, he could build something truly meaningful. Victor's efforts to rebuild the respect he had lost had become his daily focus. He spent his days in quiet reflection, working to rebuild the trust of the people around him. But no matter how much time passed, there was always one thing that remained on his mind. Lena. She had been the catalyst for his transformation. She had shown him that power wasn't something to be wielded. It was something to be shared, built, and respected. And in the months that followed, as the mansion continued to hum with life, their relationship had grown, but not in the way Victor had originally expected. He didn't see it as a romantic story unfolding, but rather as a partnership, a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. They worked side by side, with Lena still fulfilling her duties, but with a sense of equality that had been absent before. Victor had learned the value of patience and listening. No longer did he make decisions without consulting those around him. And Lena, while still cautious, began to see him as more than just the man who once ruled the house with fear. He had become someone who genuinely cared about the people in his life, even if they weren't in positions of power. One evening, As they sat in the grand dining room, Lena was sorting through papers while Victor reviewed the plans for a new business venture. The soft clinking of silverware and the quiet murmur of staff in the background created a serene atmosphere. Victor looked up from his work, his gaze landing on Lena, who was engrossed in her task. He found himself admiring her quiet determination. She had become a steadying force in his life. "Lena," Victor began, breaking the silence. She looked up, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Yes. I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About everything. How far I've come. How much I still have to learn. And how much of that learning has come from you." Lena's expression softened slightly, though she said nothing. Victor continued, his voice steady. "You've shown me more than I could have ever imagined. You've given me a new perspective on leadership, on respect, on what it means to be human. And I want you to know that I appreciate it, more than words can say." Lena paused for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had seen his transformation, but hearing it from him made it real. "Victor," she said, her voice quiet, "you don't need to thank me for that. You did the work. You chose to change. That was all you." Victor smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "But you were the one who pushed me to make that choice," he said. "You were the one who showed me that change is possible, even for someone like me. For that, I'll be forever grateful." Lena nodded, accepting his words but not letting herself get too swept away in them. She had come to understand that actions were more powerful than words, and she had seen the change in him. She had witnessed him work tirelessly to be a better man, not just for her, but for himself. And that was what made the difference. "I think you've done more than enough," she said with a small smile. "But you still have a long road ahead of you. Trust is built over time, and change isn't something that happens overnight." Victor met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words. "I know," he said, "and I'm willing to keep walking that road, one step at a time." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. One of the staff members entered, announcing that the evening's meeting with the business partners had been rescheduled. Victor nodded, acknowledging the interruption, but his eyes remained on Lena. He didn't need the meeting, not now. What he needed was to continue moving forward, to prove to her, and to himself, that he could be the man he had promised to be. "I'll be there in a moment," Victor said to the staff member before turning back to Lena. "I know I have a lot to prove, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Lena's smile widened slightly, a hint of pride in her eyes. "You're already proving it," she said. "One day at a time." Victor nodded, standing up and offering his hand to her. She looked at it for a moment before taking it, their handshake a silent agreement, an unspoken understanding of the journey they had ahead. As they stood together in that quiet, transformed mansion, neither of them knew exactly where the path would lead. But they both knew one thing. They were no longer bound by the past. They were moving forward, together, towards something new and uncertain, but full of possibility. And for the first time in years, Victor felt like he was on the right path, not just as a man of power, but as a man of integrity. He had changed, and with Lena by his side, he knew he could continue to grow. The days continued to pass, and with each passing moment, Victor felt a deeper sense of responsibility, not just for the mansion and its operations, but for the relationships within it. His transformation had not only been about restoring his own sense of integrity, but about restoring the connections he had once neglected, and none more important than the one with Lena. She had been the catalyst for his change, and though they had grown close, there was still a silent understanding between them. Trust wasn't something that could be rushed, and despite his efforts, Victor knew that Lena would never fully believe in his transformation until he proved it to her through his actions. Lena, for her part, had seen the progress. She had noticed the small changes, the way he interacted with the staff, how he had stopped using his position to intimidate others, how he had begun to value their opinions. But she still wasn't sure if this was just a phase. She wasn't certain if Victor could maintain this new version of himself in the long run. The weight of his past decisions was still a heavy burden to carry, and she didn't want to get caught in the illusion that change had come easily. One evening, Victor found himself in the study, staring out at the horizon. The mansion, with its grand hallways and towering pillars, felt different now. It wasn't the fortress of power it once was. It had become a place where growth could happen, where he could shed the weight of the past and rebuild. His mind wandered back to the first time Lena had crossed his path, a quiet figure in the background, invisible to him. Now, she stood as his equal, a partner in this journey of change. He realized how much he had taken for granted. As he stared into the distance, there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," Victor called, not needing to look to know who it was. Lena stepped inside, her presence as calm and steady as always. She had an air of quiet strength about her that was impossible to ignore. "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice breaking the silence. Victor turned his attention to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Of course," he replied, setting aside the papers on his desk. Lena walked over and took a seat across from him. She seemed hesitant, as if choosing her words carefully. "You've made a lot of changes," she began. "I've seen that. But there's something I've been thinking about." Victor leaned forward, sensing the gravity in her tone. "What's on your mind?" he asked. Lena paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I've been wondering if these changes are really permanent," she said. "I've seen a lot of people say they're going to change, but then they slip back into their old habits. So what's different now?" Victor's heart tightened slightly. He knew she was right. Trust was something that had to be earned, and he had a long way to go before Lena would truly believe that the man he was now was the man he was going to remain. "I understand your hesitation," he said quietly, "and I don't blame you for being cautious. I can't change overnight, and I can't expect you to just believe that I've changed because I say so." Lena nodded, her expression softening. "I don't expect miracles," she said, "but I need to see that this isn't just some temporary shift. I need to see that this is the real you, and that you're committed to it for the long haul." Victor sat back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. He had made many promises in the past, and they had all fallen flat. But this time, he felt something different inside him. This wasn't about promises anymore. It was about actions. It was about proving to Lena, and to himself, that he could be the man he wanted to be. "I can't promise that I'll be perfect," he said, his voice steady. "But I can promise that I will keep trying. Every day, I'm committed to being a better man, not just for you, but for everyone who's been affected by my past actions." Lena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. She had heard his words, but it was his sincerity that mattered most. She had to believe that this wasn't just another empty promise. "I'll be watching," she said softly, "but I believe you." There was a long silence between them, one filled with understanding. Victor knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready to walk it. He wasn't doing it for anyone else. He was doing it for himself. And if Lena chose to walk with him, he would do everything in his power to prove to her that he could be the man she believed him to be. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "You've been the one constant through all of this, and I don't take that for granted." Lena nodded, her gaze softening. "You're welcome," she said, "but you still have a long way to go. Just remember that change isn't just about words. It's about how you live, how you treat others, and how you stay true to who you are." Victor smiled, the weight of her words settling deep within him. He had already taken the first step toward change, but now he knew that each day would require him to continue proving that he was ready for the journey. He was ready to live up to the man he wanted to become, and, with time, he would show Lena that she could trust him, not just with her respect, but with her future as well. Victor had made significant strides in his journey of transformation, but the path was never as simple as it seemed. While the mansion had become more peaceful, with fewer moments of tension and more understanding, he could feel the weight of his past decisions still lingering. The respect he had worked so hard to earn from Lena and the staff had been hard-won, and now, he was determined not to lose it. One evening, as he sat at his desk in his study, reviewing some contracts and financial reports, the sound of footsteps outside his office caught his attention. It was late, and most of the household had settled for the night. When the door creaked open, Lena stepped in, her presence as calm as ever. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice soft, but there was something in the way she spoke that caught Victor's attention. "Not at all," Victor replied, pushing the papers aside. He motioned for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lena hesitated for a moment before walking toward the chair. She had been thinking for days about what she had seen from Victor, and she knew it was time for an honest conversation. "I've been observing you," she began, "and I've been thinking about where we stand. I know you've made real changes, Victor, and I can see that you're trying. But there's still a part of me that's unsure." Victor leaned back in his chair, a sense of understanding in his eyes. He had expected this. Trust, after all, wasn't something that could be handed over easily, even with the best of intentions. I know I can't ask for trust, he said quietly. It's something that I have to earn. And I'm ready to keep proving that I can be the man you've seen in me. Lena's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a shared understanding between them. She had seen the change, but she wasn't sure how deep it went or how long it would last. Her past had taught her that words could be empty, no matter how sincere they sounded. I need to know that this isn't just a phase, Lena said finally. I need to know that this isn't just a reaction to a mistake you made, but a genuine shift in who you are. Victor's heart tightened at her words. She wasn't wrong to doubt. She wasn't wrong to question whether his change was real or temporary. His entire life had been built on the idea that power came from control, that fear kept people in line. Now, he had to prove that respect could be built on something else entirely. I understand, he said, his voice steady. And I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trust right now. All I'm asking for is time, to show you, through my actions, that this is who I really am now. Lena studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. She had seen enough in him to believe that he was genuine, but there was still a part of her that was afraid to trust too easily. She had been burned before, and she wasn't about to make the same mistake again. Time is all anyone can ask for, she said softly. But it's not just about time. It's about consistency. I need to see that you're not going to slip back into the person you were before, that you're not going to forget who you've promised to be. Victor nodded, his gaze unwavering. I won't forget, he said, and I won't go back. I've made my choice, Lena. This is who I want to be, and I will do whatever it takes to prove that to you and to myself. There was a long silence between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Finally, Lena stood up, her expression softening. Then let's see if you can keep your promise, she said quietly. Victor stood too, his heart full of determination. I will, he said simply. Every day. As Lena turned to leave, she glanced back at him. I'll be watching, she said, her voice steady but kind. I hope you're ready. Victor watched her leave, a feeling of quiet resolve filling him. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to face the challenge. His past mistakes no longer defined him. It was his actions from this point forward that mattered, and he was determined to make them count. The mansion, with its grandeur and its history, had once been a symbol of his power. Now, it would become a symbol of his growth. And as the days passed, Victor knew that each small step he took toward the man he wanted to be was a step toward a future where he could finally live up to the expectations of those he respected, especially Lena. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't expect to be, but he was on the right path, and that was all he could ask for. It had been several months since Victor's conversation with Lena, and though the mansion had settled into a new rhythm, he felt the weight of his past still looming over him. He had worked hard to change, to prove that he was no longer the man he once was. But some days, the burden of his history seemed to weigh heavier than others. He spent his mornings in meetings, his afternoons reviewing business proposals, and his evenings walking through the mansion's sprawling grounds, reflecting on what had been and what could be. But despite all the changes he had made, there were still moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if he was truly ready to live up to the man he had promised to be. Lena, too, had noticed the shift. She saw the way Victor handled situations with more care, the way he no longer raised his voice or demanded things from others. She saw the kindness in his actions, the quiet way he had come to respect the people around him. But she also saw the internal struggle, the way he seemed to question himself at times. It wasn't easy for either of them, but Lena had begun to believe that Victor's change was real. She had seen enough to know that he wasn't pretending, that the man he was becoming was someone worthy of respect. And though she still carried the scars of the past, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. One evening, as Victor sat in the study, going over the numbers for an upcoming venture, he heard a knock at the door. It was Lena. "Do you have a moment?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was an unmistakable seriousness in it. Victor looked up from the papers and nodded. "Of course," he said, motioning for her to come in. She entered the room, her usual quiet confidence about her, but there was something different in her demeanor tonight. She wasn't just the maid anymore, and they both knew it. "I've been thinking," Lena began, walking over to a chair and sitting down. About everything. About you, about me, about this place. I know you've changed. I see it. But there's one thing I need to ask you. Victor set down the papers in front of him, focusing on her. What is it? He asked, his voice gentle, though he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was going to be different from the ones they had shared in the past. Are you really ready to be this person? Lena's words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Victor didn't know how to respond. The question wasn't one he had asked himself recently, but it was one that hit him deeply. What do you mean? He asked quietly. Lena leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. I mean, are you ready to live without the power, the control, the intimidation? Are you ready to be a man who leads with respect and integrity every single day? Because that's what this takes, Victor. It's not just about changing for a few weeks or a few months. It's about being this person all the time, even when no one's watching, even when it's hard. Victor felt his heart tighten. Lena was right. Change wasn't about making a few gestures, a few right decisions. It was about consistency, about staying true to the path even when it felt uncomfortable or difficult. He had come so far, but he knew that the real test wasn't just how he had behaved in the past, but how he would continue to act moving forward. I am ready, he said, his voice steady now. But I know it's not enough to just say it. I have to prove it every single day, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. There was a long silence between them as Lena considered his words. She had heard him say similar things before, but there was something in his tone now, something that told her he meant it. She stood up from the chair, walking over to the window. She looked out at the gardens, at the flowers that had blossomed in the months since she had planted them. The change in the garden mirrored the change in the mansion, in Victor. She had seen the flowers bloom, but she had also seen the weeds that threatened to take over. It would take time, patience, and dedication. Just like it would take time for Victor to prove that his change was real. You have a long road ahead of you, she said softly, her back to him. But I believe you're capable of it. And I believe that you're ready. Just don't forget that change doesn't come without sacrifice. You'll have to let go of parts of yourself you've relied on for years. But I think, deep down, you know that already. Victor stood up, his heart full of a quiet gratitude he hadn't known was possible. He walked over to Lena, standing beside her at the window. For a long time, he had been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who set the terms. But now, he understood that true strength didn't come from holding on to power. It came from letting go. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. For pushing me, for not giving up on me. I won't forget it. Lena looked at him, her eyes soft, but full of resolve. Don't thank me yet, she said. Just keep proving it. As they stood there in silence, watching the evening sky turn from gold to deep purple, Victor knew that this was just the beginning. The mansion, the empire, and everything in his life had changed. But the real change, he realized, would come from within. And no matter how long it took, he was ready to see it through, step by step, one day at a time.